I think it was kind of an experiment in a way, this wild kind of offbeat musical.
From the age of, I guess, 4 or 5, every single year we got to say, oh, we're going to see 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T.
I just think it's an amazing, beautiful movie, and it's so rich with imagination.
Very odd, dark, and unique movie.
After all, Dr. Seuss's stories were very unique and very different than the usual children's stories.
My first experience with Dr. Seuss was the film. My dad got a copy of it, and he pulled down the projection screen, and that was our movie.
I had heard about the 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T because of the fact that it was written by Dr. Seuss. He wrote the lyrics to the songs and the screenplay. I believe the only screenplay that he ever wrote. I think it was with Alan Scott. And I was always intrigued by the title of the film and had heard about the story.
Stanley Kramer asked Ted Geisel to write a film for him. And he wrote a story. And the story was definitely called The Kid's Story, in prose form. And then Dr. Seuss, Ted Geisel, wrote it as a screenplay.
Actually, he wasn't the icon at that time. This film was made in 1953. And through the years, he became much more popular and better known.
He was a political satirist before he became Dr. Seuss. So taking politics and putting it in a child's view, there'll always be a power out of control. And it's a timeless story that David has to fight Goliath, but never has David fought Goliath, who's a piano teacher. The heart of the story is a child questioning authority and authority out of control. In fact, I don't know if you know, but Dr. Seuss's books were banned in the United Kingdom up until the 60s because they felt they were too subversive.
Stanley was always very good at taking new talent or sort of known talent and taking them to the next level. Peter Lind Hayes and Mary Healy, who were chosen to play the leads in the film besides Hans Conried, were really a little more newer to film because they were very popular, had a radio show together. They also did theater together.
My mom was the beautiful straight gal. My dad was the jokester, but she was pretty funny herself. He wrote all their material. My parents played the Sands, I think, 14 times. I think the story goes is that they were doing 2 shows, and my dad was rushing off stage. He wanted to get upstairs to take a break. And some audience member approached my dad and said, excuse me, Mr. Hayes, you were really wonderful. And my dad said, yeah, thanks. And couldn't wait to get away to go get his break. And the man said to him, you don't know who I am, do you? And my father said, no, I'm sorry, I don't. He said, I'm Stanley Kramer. And my dad reached and took his hand and kissed it. I mean, he knew who Stanley Kramer was. Oh my God, thank you so much.
He loved discovering people and giving them that break.
And that's where he was offered the job. Stanley said, I've got this film, and I think you and Mary would be great for it. And my parents were in heaven.
Come on, the weatherman's announcing that the weather's right for
And them singing and dancing and getting to use all the talents that they had because they were triple threats and they could do it all. They come from such extraordinary backgrounds, and when I see the dance that they do, and I see the hypnotic dance between my dad and brilliant Hans Conried, brilliant. And I think this film gave them a chance to do that at a really classy level.
Hans Conried is terrific as the evil piano teacher, and I use the word terrific because terrific has double meaning. It means wonderful and it also means terrible. And he was both of those things.
He was tall and lanky, had a very interesting quality. He was a little elegant, a little not elegant. He was a little sinister, not that much sinister. I think he was a great Dr. Terwilliger. You know, he was more comedic than he was actually frightening, and I think that was right.
5,000 little fingers, and they'll be mine, all mine, practicing 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
I don't believe it. This is crazy.
I mean, Tommy Reddick, this wonderful kid actor, he's so believable and so real. His performance is just perfect.
I think Stanley said of him, and I think it's true, nobody else could have done that role.
Tommy Reddick had had very little experience. You know, he went on to do the Lassie series later on after this film, but he was the perfect little boy for this particular story because he wasn't one of those child stars that were all, you know, he was a very normal little boy, and I think he fit this role very well.
I remember the images of Bart climbing up the ladder, the red ladder, and and his shirt and his pedal pushers, and of course the crazy sets and the spectacular sets.
They had difficulty lighting that set so it looked as substantial as it did because apparently it was like 2x4s and paste, and you know, it wasn't the big sturdy thing that it looked, so they had to shoot it from particular angles.
Rudy Sternhead could take $5 and make it look like 400,000. He had a real knack for understanding set design for film.
Institute, Collins speaking. Yes, madam.
Mary Healy was in for a real treat because she had Jean-Louis do her costumes. He was really associated with Columbia Pictures. Now, every studio in those days had a major designer. MGM had Helen Rose, Paramount had Edith Head, and Columbia Pictures had Jean-Louis. He also designed clothes for Katharine Hepburn and Katherine Houghton in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Oh, he was a great designer.
We were sprayed green every morning, which was like, okay, you know, they spray us green. So you stood there and you turn around so they could spray all of you. Then you put on the outfit and went to work. Because we were these people or these instruments in a dungeon.
The sequence called the Dungeon Schlim-Schlom is amazing because it's the depiction of all these musicians who are held prisoner because they don't play the piano. And there's all these kooky things that were invented by Dr. Seuss.
So I was a trombone, which didn't look quite like a trombone. The design of the instruments in the dungeon sequence, I think, is just wonderful, whoever the designer was. The trombone did have a long slide thing. I remember I ruined a take once because I broke my trombone. I turned the wrong way and hit somebody, but nobody yelled at me, so it was okay. I just got another trombone and we kept going.
It's Hollywood at its zenith, and Columbia used and borrowed musicians from other studios. The orchestrations in the movie are unique in that they tried to create many different kinds of colorations.
When they had that, I believe it was a 75-piece orchestra doing this, and when they first did the songs, they actually, these musicians who'd been everywhere and done everything, stood up and applauded. They thought that's how good this music is, and I think it still holds up.
The imagery in the film is dazzling, and the use of color is extraordinary, and the way they've combined all the elements, especially choreographically, Eugene Loring's work is amazing.
Eugene Loring was known for his wonderful ballets. Basically, to be a choreographer, you really have to know how to do everything, but some people excel in one thing or another. Like, I am a tap dancer. I can do all the other kinds of dancing. When I go in, I play the music over and over until I'm very well acquainted with it, and then make up things, and I'm sure Gene Loring did too.
Whenever he was was teaching, you sort of, you didn't freeze, but I mean, your attention became more intense. In some ways it was good, and sometimes, but I guess it was good because you learn that discipline, and then if you work he was sort of an authoritarian kind of figure. And he kept that distance between him and his students. And we were always a little bit, I won't say frightened, but in awe of him a bit. He choreographed to suit the person or the sequence that he was choreographing for. He, of course, choreographed a number of times for Sid Charisse. He had a style, but it wasn't an obvious kind of style. It had a subtlety to it.
He had a good sense of humor, and I think you had to have that for this movie. And he came up with a lot of crazy ideas, like the beard. I just thought Gene must have had a nightmare, and he woke up and said, "We'll attach the beards." That was really crazy. And then the other thing that amused me when I saw it, Mary Healy and Peter Lynn Hayes were friends of mine years ago, so I got a big kick out of seeing them. And they were wonderful.
Peter Lynn Hayes and Mary Healy. My mom grew up in New Orleans. She was Miss New Orleans of 1935. She was a singer at night in the famous Blue Room at the Roosevelt Hotel, secretary during the day. My dad was born in San Francisco, and his mother was a singer, and he went on stage with her and he never looked back. They were married 57 and a half years. My dad passed in '98. And I think it's a great tribute to them that this is being done, because it was the finest experience that they ever had making a film. And of course it was a disappointment to everybody, the way it went. But it was the thing they were so proud of. He knew they were working on a piece of art. You know, and I read later, of course, in reading the history, that, but that it was too scary for kids of that day. And I'm telling you, the villains of my youth, Captain Hook was to come later. That guy in the elevator going down to the dungeon, nightmares. Nightmares.
The horrifying moment when the yellow buses come and kids are taken out, and it's so Auschwitz reminiscent, and the kids have their toys removed. That sort of stays with the once seen, never forgotten. The insane Dress Me Up number. So I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I always tell people, it's not a good movie, but it's a great movie.
And I wanted to see this movie, but it wasn't something that had ever turned up on television in my orbit. So when I heard that it was going to be screened at the LA County, I was thrilled. It's an imperfect film. The movie went through many permutations. There were many revised scripts.
I got my hands on the original script, and it's so interesting when they get to the ballet, it simply is a couple of lines that says, "and musicians do ballet." And that's such a brief piece that I think was added. That scene was added from the original script.
It was supposed to be in the body of the film, and then when they re-edited it, it became sort of a prologue to the movie. And I would have loved to have seen it in the context of the movie. And there's also a still that shows Peter Lynn Hayes in that ballet with Bart Collins. And so I don't know if that was just a sort of casual production shot, but it looks like they're in action. So what was Zabludovsky doing in the Butterfly Ballet? I don't know if we'll ever know the answer.
When you're going to make a musical, you've got to have a vision. You've got to have a vision for the color and the dances and the fantasy, you know, that can let your imagination run wild. If you don't have the money to work with, then you're limited in that, aren't you?
I know that Stanley, whom I talked to once about the film, was so disappointed in what it could have been.
I know he was disappointed in this film, but I think he was very surprised that it's become a cult classic now.
I can understand why it's a cult movie, because you could watch this movie a number of times and still want to go back and watch it again because you keep seeing something else. That's how rich it is in its detail and its imagination.
Films, sometimes when they come out, just don't make it. They're ahead of their time. People are not interested. And later on television, or if it's shown someplace else, it suddenly catches on. And then people take an interest in it and find it better than you thought it was. That's always a wonderful surprise, by the way, when that happens.